I hope we're all energized after that little coffee break, and we were just contemplating that we're almost at the last leg of the confluence, and I hope we can have this spirited discussion that keeps you all still engaged with us. We're talking about generative AI in the workplace, and how it basically is touching lives across, and we'd like to keep this panel a very conversational this time, and I hope you do like the banter that we have today. All right, so Suman, if you'd like to start off on one of the discussion pieces that we want to have today around the boundaries would be AI and leadership, right. And the second one we want to dwell on is around hyper-personalization in the age of AI,
right.
And the last one towards the end we'll take on is the pitfalls of our AI and the biases and compliances and regulatory. So can we start with something around the first topic in what you feel about GenAI and how it has currently already impacted and will continue to impact in the way we lead?
Right. First and foremost, good evening everybody. Hope you're all energized after the coffee break, and it's great to be back here. I think the last year that we were here, we were talking about future of work. It was in the context of hybrid and remote, and how the workplace is changing, or rather the place of work is changing. And it's amazing that in 12 months time we have something completely different that's disrupting the future of work again, and this time it is not the place of work, but it's really how we work. And I think all of us are intimately aware of what GenAI has done, which is like literally take over every aspect of work, and how we manage our business, all of that. But I think the biggest thing to me is around what does it mean from a leadership standpoint, right? I think from a work standpoint, very clear, there are so many ways that we can use GenAI to make our business, our work more efficient. But I want us to pause and think about what does it mean for leadership, right? And there is a ton of debate around it, and I'm sure we can have a spirited conversation. But I think to me, when I think about it, a couple of things. One is we all talk about leadership competencies as HR folks, right? So I think one of the biggest competency that I'm seeing coming in is this awareness of technology, and how do you use technology to make your business better, to make your decision better. A big part of leadership has always been the whole, the IQ part of it, the data part of it. How do you really look at data, insights that inform your strategy? If you look at GenAI and what AI is doing, that's pretty much, taking over all of that, right? So that individual brilliance on the IQ side of it is becoming a level playing field. And my view is that leadership that will make a difference is going to be way, way more about the softer aspects, right? About humility, about the people leader that you are, the softer aspects of it will become a lot more important as a differential for leadership in the age of AI. But I'd love to hear from Praveen as well.
Right. So I've been part of a lot of the educational institutions. So in the higher education, I would like to kind of take an example in terms of how leadership in universities have actually dealt with this confusion. Because when you look at GenAI, I mean, all of us probably experienced it to be, wow, it can get things done faster, better, cheaper, right? I mean, that's the general notion. But one of the things that professors would go and complain to the leadership is, all of my students, right? How do I make sure they don't use generative AI to take their exams or assignments and so on? Now, obviously, there are a lot of places, which took the view that maybe we should abolish, right? No one uses generative AI. But then there are schools which also went back and challenged the professors, saying generative AI is going to be there. There are a lot more tools that will be there. The question is, how will you change your teaching pedagogy and so on, right?
Nice.
Why? Because now it gets faculty to start thinking about the empathy for student learning, saying how can you use the same technology to accelerate learning, to make it a lot more engaging, personalized and fun.
Right.
Now for a leader, right, bringing in that sort of perspective,
Right.
I think is the key aspect here. Now the question is, can we do those experiments? Because we don't have a very good answer yet, right? We are living at that edge. And I think leaders probably have to take on those challenges, because obviously faster, better, cheaper has implications. But at the same time, like you said, I think the EQ becomes extremely important.
Correct.
So the GenAI is probably built with a lot of data. It amplifies cognition in some sense, but I think we talked about it. It's also the heart, right? You need the heart in the right place. So that's where I think the leadership makes a big difference.
Yeah. I think we have a lot of HR professionals in the audience,
100%.
right? And I have been in L&D roles in the past, where when we talk about leadership development, right, and we always think about, preparing future leaders means making you aware of, how do you use data, your financial acumen, how do you look at, look out into the future, how do you look at trends, all of that. Now just think about how we have to redefine, same thing like how you're doing with education is also with leadership development, is really redefine, and those are the harder skills now to develop, which are the softer aspects, right? So I think just lot for us to learn and think about, unlearn and relearn with what's happening with AI coming into the workplace.
There's a thought around Suman on your point, right? Learning, relearning, and what Praveen has also said. And I was just discussing with this gentleman outside about lost generations, right? Whenever something highly disruptive comes along, right, there is always one generation that pays it.
Right.
And I think we are sort of seeing this now, maybe, but the macroeconomics also has a play. But the current generation, which is currently studying in their higher education and are just going to be out or just been out recently in the last 1 year,
Right.
are finding it extremely difficult to be valued. Because what AI 6 years, 5, 7 years back was, I would easily be able to explain it saying that imagine you have a 10-year-old kid who is very sharp and who can listen to what you say and does exactly what you do, and imagine now 1 million of those 10 kids doing work for you. So whatever you can get done is with that 10-year-old, but imagine you have 1 million of those. That's how I used to explain artificial intelligence to actually a 10-year-old, right? But today that 10-year-old has grown up to be a graduate,
Right.
and from probably the most elitist of universities. Now you have 1 million of those graduates to work with you, for you, along with you. So our own graduates that are just out or going to be out are sort of facing that challenge that what they can do, a very well trained attuned model can do 100 or 1,000 times better at a fraction of a cost. So what do you think is the lost generation in terms of high speed disruptions true? Will we have a lost generation?
Yes and no. I think I wouldn't call it lost generation. I think this is the intermediate generation, I would say, right? I think give it 5 or 10 years from now, I think AI will be such an integral part of the curriculum, right? I think we're all still learning how to use AI and how to become more skilled at using it in the workplace, right? But you're right, think about coding itself, right? So much of code can just be generated using AI, right? A lot of the work that you required such a large group of engineering team to do, now you can have GenAI too. That is true, but I don't think it's ever going to replace engineers completely. They're going to do different kind of work, and that's the whole redesign that companies will have to go through. Because true enough, even in my company, when I think about it, it's not like we can rip and replace right away, because we don't know how to manage it that way.
Correct.
Right, so it is going to take us time to do that, but if we don't do that, you know that you won't be competitive. So I think it won't be like a light switch that happens in terms of transition. I think it will be companies also, organizations also having to learn AI skills in terms of being able to deploy it as well. But you're right, I think the whole education will transform with the use of AI, with AI knowledge that you will have people coming in. I think currently the requirement of people that we need in AI is not nearly, we're not going to meet the demand we have with the supply we have. So that is going to be a transformation you're going to see in the engineering field, in the AI field itself. But I think it is going to be a transition phase not only for the generation, I think even for the organizations. And I think that's the phase we are in. But I'm going to refer to the educationist amongst us to give us a more evolved and an informed view of it.
So we thought about
we spoke about it, no?
we thought about the what are those necessary skills, right, that people need to have, the knowledge and abilities given the tool which is there right now, right? That happened with the calculators.
Correct.
But people didn't give up on doing mental math. Why? Because you still need it when you're having a conversation real time. You should be able to calculate these things, and so as a practice you still need that skill, right? When you take there are some skills which become extremely important, even if you take forget about all of GenAI, just the chat interface, your ability of expressing what you want the model to do should be written in English.
Correct.
And that too very precisely, right? That requires language ability even for the human, and so that's one of the skill that's never going to go away.
But Praveen, that's changing. That's what I'm saying, right? Come November with the next release, a lot of that will be changed, right? So that's because we are on that exponential curve,
right?
And what we're going to be preparing ourselves. So we spoke about that just-in-time education, right?
So I'm still betting on that in the following sense. The reason is that these models are not dynamic, they don't act on their own. You still have to prompt it, if not poke it, right? Something has to be done, right? And that's the interface which I'm thinking about. So what that does, I mean, now it's probably language, right? You have a conversation, I didn't understand what you said, you ask me and then we clarify and then there's a dialogue. Now what happens here is that you also probably need to understand how the model is thinking,
right?
And that's computational thinking, right?
Correct.
I think even if none of us learn programming, we should learn computational thinking so that we understand how all these AI systems work.
Correct.
Then we know how to collaborate with them. That's one. Now the second thing is, we are, when at work or even at school, wherever, we are always in these moments where you are given a task and you probably know some of it or a lot of it, but there will be points where you don't know what to do, right? Then the question is, what do you do when you don't know what to do, right? And what did we do earlier? We went to Google search, and we did the search, find, and somehow validated the whole resource, and maybe others also voted on it saying this is reliable, and as a result you are getting a
democratized view of what's working, what's not.
But today what you're getting is, when you prompt it, you get a response which is only for you. No one else has validated it.
That's with cognition of time, that's a very valid point. I'm going to take that tail from there and bring you to personalization. So what you just said and what you ended with,
So
it's hyper personalization, right?
right.
And in the age that we live in, what does hyper personalization mean to you
Right.
from a
So-
workplace point of view?
So if you kind of accelerate this some more, I think where we are headed is the situation where you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
You need to learn a skill. You'll probably have to learn it just in time,
Yep.
and you need to know how to learn it on your own so that you're able to perform that task and then continue. And that's the kind of agility we might end up seeing.
Suman, isn't that so? You come from the L&D background as well. You just said, right? Praveen brought in a very pertinent point of just-in-time learning, and largely, is it because the speed of change and disruption is such that before we ingest, understand, and build measures, assessments to see whether it's working, not working, it changes completely. So you got to just agile education or learning. Is that a thing?
It may be a thing in future, but I think the way people learn is changing, right? Google has now become this encyclopedia that everybody goes to, right? We do our research, all of that on that. So I think the whole aspect of how people learn is changing because our attention spans are also coming down, right? I don't know if you've read the research, which is human attention is now officially less than that of a goldfish.
Wow.
Okay, do you know what is the attention span
8
of
seconds.
a goldfish? Less than that. Human attention now is less than that, and a lot of it is because we have so many distractions, devices, so much of information overload,
Stimulation, yeah.
so much of hyper simulation, all of that stuff, right? So what does that do to learning when your attention span is only that much, right? The traditional ways in which we've been taught is to focus, pay attention, practice. That seems to kind of be changing right now, and that is what brings in place this whole just-in-time learning and shorter modules, gamification, which is really helping people learn the way they learn best now, right? As our the ways of working is changing as well. So I think just-in-time learning is there to stay, but hyper focus, hyper personalization, all that is going to become the way of life in terms of how people learn, how people retain, how people apply.
And does that also differentiate across from what a Gen Z does or a millennial does or a boomer does? Is that does that variate for you? You've seen that, especially in the workplace point of view, when you're doing the L&D, and if you want to, I remember our training lead with heart at FreshWorks, right? So now when you do this to a Gen Z in this current age, or the age that we are heading towards, would that change?
I think the concept is still the same, right? That's the value system you want to teach, which is core to your company, which is leading with heart. Now, the way you would do it in my times would be, somebody would come, you would have a workshop, and we'd all be in there for 3 days.
Yeah.
That's the way I'm used to learning, for instance, but that's so passé now, right? I think now it's all about individual journeys.
Okay.
And people learn when they learn, where they learn, how they want to learn. And there's a lot of merit to it. I'm not, for a moment saying that's not incorrect, but a lot of times what happened with the other way of learning was you went to a workshop, you learned, but nothing else changed, and there was no incentive to apply. But now your learning happens when you need it, right? So it's that just in time. I'm going into a difficult conversation. Let me go get a practice session in that, then I go apply. So can be a very efficient way of doing it.
100%.
But you got to completely rethink and redesign the same value that you want to teach, but how you're going to teach. And I think technology allows you to do that. But you've got to, it's not just technology, you've got to think about how you bring in the social aspect, the learning aspect, all of that. So to me, this is like the big disruption that we are seeing.
Hyper-personalization, right?
Hyper-personalization. Yep. And that's the thing that excites me the most.
I'm going to ask you that.
Yes.
You gave it away.
No, so think about it, right? In our personal lives. Everything is hyper personalized, everything is becomes so easy for us, right? Banking is so easy now. Think about buying a mutual fund, right? Remember those, I mean, at least in my times, right? It was those long monologues you had. Somebody gave you this big, you know, document to read which you never understood. So, but now it is easy, just in time, when you want to do, and it makes you understand what you're doing, how you're doing, presents you with data, all of that. All that is there in our personal lives, right? Come to the workplace. Somebody still tells you, oh, there's a lead with heart workshop, please go there, right? It just feels so out of sync.
Yep.
So that is where I am excited about with what GenAI and technology can really do to transform the whole people experience in the workplace. I think we've got to do consumer grade people experiences in the workplace, and I think that's what hyper personalization, GenAI, and just so much more potential to innovate in HR tech.
So exciting, positive signs here from you. Thumbs up.
Absolutely.
Now let's
Yes.
talk about pitfalls.
Oh.
Okay. So, Praveen, in your digital learning capacity and journey that what you built with ISB, in general in your workplace as well, what do you think have been the prominent pitfalls that are already there, you've seen, and they're going to persist, and whether Gen AI is going to cause it or whether Gen AI is going to solve it?
I think in the education space, I mean digital learning space, what we have seen is the way people learn in the training programs or all the academic programs, not everyone has the same learning style, right? So, because of the Gen AI, there's an advantage of personalizing it,
Okay.
but then there's also this pitfall of saying that if you can do it just in time, you can also do it later, right? And there's an inherent procrastination that
Yep.
comes in. You don't want to kind of go through deep work which
Right.
requires you to think, and so these technologies also kind of, although they are very good to accelerate some things, it kind of puts you completely off, right? You're augmenting a lot
Yep.
of knowledge, but then
I can see that.
yeah.
I am that. What about you, Suman? You have another view on the larger pitfalls that you see with generative AI?
See, one of the things with any of these forms of predictive models, technology, all of that is always that the machine learns from the data you provide.
Yep.
And therein lies the big if, right? And so if you provide it with a certain kind of data, it is going to learn to give you results a certain way. And so especially when it comes to HR, if you use it for, you know, selection, leadership testing, all of that, that's what makes me nervous, right? Because we've seen this.
Could be
right?
misconstrued. Right?
Yeah, we've already seen this, right? A lot of times some of the hiring predictive models, the large data set you provide is of course going to be based on the large group of people you have who belong to a certain
Yep.
majority.
But what if we
And
don't
so-
have the demography? If we've shredded off the demography, do you still think it will still have that bias?
It does,
Okay.
because what you're doing is you've got to remove the bias. It has the ability to, is what I'm saying, right?
Okay.
Because what you are then saying is success is defined by one kind of demographic.
Yep.
You can take out the demographic data, but it's still defined by a majority which is a certain demographic. So that's what we see happen, right? So a lot of times when we define what are the success parameters, what does success look like, all of that, it's fed by that large majority, right? So those are the things that you have to be careful about. I'm not saying we can't,
Yeah.
but we talked about bias and pitfalls, right? So it's not perfect yet. So I don't think we all should jump to just AI solution right away. I think we have testing to do before we validate and make sure. I just want to end on one quick note, which is for all of you who are wondering, why I also have that note of caution. I get very excited about GenAI and its possibilities. So in all my wisdom as a mom, when I was trying to get my daughter to study, I said, I'm going to give you this test. And of course I was, trying to set a question paper for her. And then I said, why am I doing this? I'm going to go to ChatGPT and say, ChatGPT, can you please, do algebra for this grade, this level, blah, blah, blah. And it generated.
Yeah.
And I was super happy. I said, look at GenAI. And I also said, oh, can you, by the way, give me answers so I don't even have to do the math myself. I can just take it. It was not correct.
Yep.
Right? So therein lies the thing that it is still
you got it on a bad
nascent.
Day.
Maybe I got it on a bad day. But it's nascent, right? It goes to tell you that it has huge potential.
Yeah.
And I think maybe next year when we are sitting over here, we'll see a whole new version, whole new advancement. But I think we all have to be cautious not to just jump onto the bandwagon blindly without testing it.
Thank you so much. I think we have about a minute left. We would love to open this up for a Q&A with the audience. If you like our spirited responses, we are here. Guys, anyone? No? All right.
We should ask ChatGPT for questions.
I'm not answering them. There's one? Yeah, sorry.
Thanks. Some interesting conversations. I'm going to pick on what both of you said, Suman. And with ChatGPT coming, just picking on the example that you gave, you went into ChatGPT, got the question paper, and the answers were wrong. Just makes me think, like, are we moving from a knowledge generation to information generation? Because if you take a look at it, a few years ago when Google was there was still a lot of work that had to be done by us in processing the information that is thrown out by Google. But today, if you take a look at it, when most of the information is coming in a process format with various GenAI tools, is there a fear, especially in the education or in the workplace, that we are moving into an era where information availability, especially with the data explosion, is becoming more important than the knowledge of the individual?
The educator take a shot.
You want the educator to, the academician here?
Whoever's not going to use GenAI.
So I think, in terms of how the GPT, right, we did do a lot of tests with faculty saying, okay, you're teaching this lesson, now let's see what GenAI would give it. The faculty would not accept that at all. The reason is, that's the critical thinking which is needed. If you look at the large language models, right, these are referred to as stochastic parrots, right? They see the next word, best probability for the next word and give it to you. The reasoning people are still developing, right? The reasoning engines are not yet fully there.
Yep.
But they might get there, like you said next year we might see a lot of that.
Yep.
But I think if people are very critically evaluating the responses, that process is also a lot of knowledge creation, right? So that's how I would see it. In fact, I teach computer science, so one of the exams that we have done is to get ChatGPT to give questions. The students loved the experience because the ChatGPT was helpful, not giving the answers, but then it was saying that, by the way, you answered this question partially, there's another part which you missed out, right? Some of these experiences are like really nice. Will an examiner in the exam hall give you that? Absolutely not. So there are a lot of these use cases which we don't know, but then I believe that the fact that these responses itself are being critically evaluated is still a process of knowledge generation, right? So that's how I see it.
Is that done?
Add something to this point about reasoning, that ChatGPT, the question which you said. So as Future Skills Prime, we have a mandate to, compulsorily upskill ourselves on ChatGPT. One of the things which came up was the tree of thought prompt, which works best. If you tell ChatGPT step by step,
Yep.
what is the process of algebra. So if you had told ChatGPT step by step the formulae and the reasoning that needs to be done, only then it can come up with the right responses.
That's right. I have one example of that. I asked ChatGPT if 0 is part of the natural numbers or whole numbers. It would answer the question saying it's part of whole numbers, but it did make a mistake. It said whole numbers are a subset of natural numbers, which is not true, right? But then you start reasoning with it, saying what is a subset, right? Then it will define what a subset is. Then you ask it a question saying, then how come whole numbers are a subset? Then it will start correcting, right? That's still not 100% reasoning which is going on there. It's a way the reasoning model itself is built in terms of how it should respond. So, but you're right, there are a lot of these methods which prompt engineers are experimenting with, right?
Yes.
And there are a lot of interesting prompt libraries now that are getting created. It's very exciting space. And that's where the critical thinking aspect also comes in.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen.
For more content on tech and leadership, subscribe to NASSCOM YouTube channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update.